Josh Hennig, Deshaun Hendricks, Hunter Brody, filling in for Mike Gill on the Sports Bash. We need to talk with Frank about the news that came out this morning. They had a press conference today. They said a lot of nothing, it seemed like, in the press conference. Frank, Charlie Manuel is back, and I feel like this is more of a cosmetic move than a logistical move.
Yeah, in fact, at the press conference, they kind of said as much. They gave John Maley a lot of credit. In fact, they even said on the converse that Charlie Manuel was a big part of the organizational hitting philosophy. So they basically were trying not to downplay the work Maley had done, and they basically gave at least the impression that it's not going to be that different. They say there's not really a change in philosophy. It's not a big shift, but what they're hoping to get out of it is, they said, a new energy level. And one word that really stood out to me from this press conference was the word looseness. There had been a lot of chatter that perhaps the hitting philosophy was so heavy under John Maley that some players maybe lost some focus. So I think that Charlie, as we saw when he was a manager in Philadelphia, very much loose with his players, and maybe they're hoping that looseness will help the offense relax a little bit, because I think everybody will agree that they've certainly performed.
Now, we know Charlie won't be in the house tonight. It's going to be Pedro Guerrero is going to be the interim hitting coach till Charlie arrives. But, Frank, realistically, how much of a difference can Charlie make on a team that's got a month and a half basically left in the season, when realistically, couldn't you argue a hitting coach does most of their work in spring training and not during the season?
Yeah, I think with 44 games to go, there's not that much that somebody's going to come in and do. Certainly, it was very convenient that Charlie Manuel already works for the organization and he's around. But I think that what we see frequently when hitting coaches are let go, they just try to bring about a sense of urgency to the organization and to the players. As a lot of people have been saying in recent days, the status quo isn't fun. The fans aren't enjoying it. The players aren't playing well. So it's just a way to sort of shake things up just a little bit. And we saw back when Bill Thompson got fired as a Phillies hitting coach and they replaced him with Greg Gross, the offense did wake up a little bit. So I think that they're hoping that a little bit of shakeup will not necessarily be a dramatic shift in terms of what the hitting coach does, but just sort of establishes either a sense of urgency or just a sense to the players that the status quo wasn't good. We're going to move forward in a different direction, and the offense often jumps on board when something like that happens.
Just to play devil's advocate, Frank, couldn't I argue that the status quo has less to do with the hitting coach and more to do with the organization as a whole? I mean, it's Clintack who built this roster. It's Kapler who's been the messenger for the organization. I feel like this is more the team. The issues with this team is more of an organizational issue than it is just the hitting coach.
I think that's fair to say. What I frequently said on these airwaves is that starting rotation really has been the death of this Phillies team. I was even listening to MLB Network nationally earlier just to try to get their sense. And former general manager Jim Duquette, he said, hey, look, you had the same rotation last year. You went with it again, even though they weren't good enough last year. They all seem to think that was the big issue that happened with this Phillies team this year. But often, as we've seen throughout the course of Major League Baseball, the hitting coach is often the first one to go. And really, the numbers really did show. And if you look at the write-up I have on 97.3 ESPN.com, Corey Seidman had checked out some really specific stats just about how poorly the Phillies have performed of late with their bats. So it seems like that's one way to make a change, even though it doesn't alleviate the major problem. Maybe it can take one of the problems that they have more control over and try to improve upon that a bit. Because let's face it, you're not going to replace 4/5 of the starting rotation with 44 games to go in a season.
All right, Frank, we are going to hit you with the mailbag questions. Kevin asks, has Nick Williams increased his trade value by playing well in AAA?
Yeah, it's funny. If you look at Nick Williams' numbers, they are all-star level. Somebody who's been hitting over 340, who's hitting doubles, triples, home runs, OPS 1054. Very much strong numbers. you notice the Phillies opted to trade for a left-handed outfielder in Corey Dickerson at the trade deadline. They were not going to give Nick Williams another opportunity, and I think that's because he sort of wrote his own ticket. He was batting 158 in the major leagues this year. Now, last year he was better, but he wasn't a whole lot better. And I think that at this point, he's probably a good trade candidate, but I don't think he's going to get much in return. I think other teams will see that he wasn't able to cut it in the major league for the Phillies, and whoever brings him on is probably going to be somebody who's a rebuilt team and says, what the heck, we'll give them a shot. Maybe we'll strike gold. And every once in a while, those types of players do strike gold for somebody, but I think he has very, very little in terms of trade value at the moment.
I like the next question a lot. It's from Ed. If the Phillies fail to win the wild card, is Gabe Kapler out?
Now, here's the thing. When I wrote this, so I wrote this mailbag this morning before we got the news about John Mealy and Charlie Manuel joining the coaching staff. So my response at the time was, first and foremost, and I still believe this to be the case, I think the Gabe Kapler is safe. I do think Gabe Kapler will be coming back next year. But the point I made, we tend to see the coaches go before the eyes turn to the manager. So what happened since this morning when I wrote it up is that they let a coach go. So you can blame the coaches to a certain extent, and I think by letting John Mealy go in some ways, the front office sort of gave Kapler some extra rope, right? Because 44 games for the rest of the year. Charlie Manuel is not the long-term hitting coach for this team. He's just going to fill out the year for the Phillies, and then they'll be hiring somebody else in the offseason. So it's a lot easier for a team like the Phillies to let the coaches go and then see what happens next. So I think that this is going to be the firing of this year. They might shuffle some other coaches around. In fact, Jim Salisbury of NBC Sports Philadelphia did say as much, that they're still talking about maybe some other moves. But I think this is going to be the big move that we're going to see for this season. I don't think Christian is in any trouble, for example, just because the rotation he was given, the fact that 5/8 of his opening day bullpen, the 5 strongest relievers are all hurt. So I think he's got a little flexibility there before they would make a move there. But usually it's the coaches that go first. And what happens in these 44 games? Certainly he can't. The team performs well. It only helps Gabe Kapler for the long term. But even if they don't make it to the wild card after these 44 games, and they don't make up that little bit of ground and grab a wild card, I think you can still point to this move with John Mealy, and you could say, well, at the end of the season, we did make that move for the hitting coach. There really wasn't a lot of time to really see what we could do. Here's our new hitting coach. We're going to have a new approach, and I think that takes us some time.
Last question from Julian. How about trading Rhys Hoskins for a starter in the offseason? He fades every year.
Well, that's really harsh. If you look at Rhys's numbers, he's like 2 for his last 28, which definitely is concerning. Maybe he was somebody that was feeling a lot of pressure, or maybe Charlie Manuel is going to help him sort of relax and turn his swing around a little bit. But I don't think you want to trade a player like Hoskins who you've seen the highs. I think you're not going to necessarily get a lot in return if you make a trade when somebody's on their downside. Now, would I rule it out? Absolutely not. I guess a lot would depend on what type of pitcher you're talking in this off season. Is there an ace type pitcher, and it does require you to give Rhys Hoskins up? I think you have to list every possibility. But I think that the question, the way it was asked, the way Julian asked it, was that it's almost like they thought that Rhys Hoskins was failing in a way, so therefore the Phillies need to remove him from their roster. I don't think you want to make that type of decision exactly. And I think even if he does struggle down the stretch, I think he gets next year to even work it out. And I really don't see any change happening at first base in the immediate future, but you never know. Somebody could knock your socks off with a trade you didn't expect. But I think the Phillies plan to hold on to Rhys Hoskins. I think that they plan to work out some kinks, which might be part of a sophomore slump, so to speak, and see where things go.
Yeah, Frank, just to follow up on that, I think part of the problem for people is, one, it's been a disappointing season, and people are trying to find people to blame for it. But two, I still think there's a part of the Phillies fan base that the last good thing they remember was the Big Four. It was Howard, Utley, Rollins, and Hamels. And for a lot of people, I think that they, in their minds, whether they're doing it consciously or subconsciously, they're comparing Hoskins to Howard. And when Howard came up, he was ungodly good. And I think Hoskins has been very good, but he hasn't been Ryan Howard level. And I think because people are comparing Hoskins to Howard, something I don't think is really fair, I think that's why people have a criticism of him without understanding that he's still one of the best young power hitters in the game.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. I mean, Phillies fans really had it good for a long time. And, and as it was all happening, I mean, how many times did you stop and think and look around the field and you see Rollins, Utley, and Howard and Cole Hamels on the mound and think like this is a team for the ages. I mean, if you look back on Phillies history, this is one of the strongest cores that they've ever had. And trying to get one player like those four is hard enough, as we've seen. But unfortunately, it's still fresh in our minds. They haven't won since, and I think fans really crave what they used to have. In fact, that's why perhaps fans got a little too excited about the likes of Maikel Franco over the last few years. Is they got used to a certain level of play, and it's probably not going to be replicated like that anytime soon in terms of a big roster construction. Again, I think too, in some respects, they might have lofty thoughts for Scott Kingery at times too. Although he's having a much better year, very solid year this year, and struggled a little bit last year. I think he got some of that very same criticism.
Follow him on Twitter at Frank Klose. That's Frank, Klose. Frank Klose on Twitter. Check out all of his work at 973ESPN.com and also on the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Frank, it's always fun when we actually can have some news for you. So it's very convenient of the Phillies to make this announcement this morning for your segment today.
Well, Jim Salisbury called something was coming, so I was kind of on the lookout. Luckily, it happened before I got on.
All right, Frank. Well, we know the Phillies are playing the Cubs this week. We got Vargas tonight. We got Hamels versus Nola tomorrow. So we're going to keep keeping our eyes on the Phillies. Appreciate the time on a Tuesday.
Thanks, guys.